We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm calling the board meeting for the meeting to order for the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind Board of Directors meeting. I'm going to ask Leticia if she is on to go ahead and call roll. Maybe not. All right, I will go ahead with what I've got. Hopefully I have everybody. Maybe not. Oh, I've got her. Leticia, do you want to go ahead and call roll? I think you're on mute. All right, I'm just going to go around. Mike Gordon.
I'm here.
Colette Chapman.
Here.
Lynn Davison.
Present.
Brittany Buchanan.
Present.
Linda Bove.
Present. Hi.
Catherine Cienko.
Hello. Present.
And myself, Suke Kneifel. I think I got everybody. Moving on to agenda item 1.02, it's an information item, presentation on accessibility. I'm going to turn it over to Erin and Dr. Scarborough.
Perfect. Thank you. And excuse me, I'm trying to multitask. I'm wearing multiple hats here. Good evening, Board President Kneifel, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, and Assistant Superintendents Cooper and Katchoff. For the record, my name is Aaron Moya, and I'm the Director of Media Technology. Today, I will be presenting information on how ASDB is accessible via our websites and social media platforms. Included within your board packets is an accessibility presentation that goes pretty in depth of how the ASDB media team makes digital media accessible. I kind of like to call this a procedural presentation as it shows the why, how, and where. Some key areas of focus really is designing, developing the digital media platforms in a way that accommodates all audiences with the goal to create an inclusive environment where everyone can navigate and engage with our websites and social media channels effortlessly. Our mission actually revolves around comprehending and acknowledging the distinctive needs of our student body and community. And we're committed to guaranteeing universal accessibility of our online content, ensuring, of course, it is fully inclusive. All facets of our digital content adhere to ADA guidelines, that's the Americans with Disabilities Act, WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and also Arizona state policies. Some key areas to consider for our websites and social media accessibility include quite a bit of things. I'll try to keep it short. Alt text image descriptions, clear navigation, color contrast, keyboard accessibility, captions and transcripts, and proper use of hashtags. Now, in addition to these common accessibility standards that are set, we actually strive to make content more accessible for our deaf, hard of hearing, and blind low vision communities. This is primarily done through the use of audio description and embedded ASL videos. Now, for the ASL portion of things, I will go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Scarborough. so she could provide some insight regarding the ASL portion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Erin, for allowing me to be part of this presentation. Typically for content that is uploaded to social media or websites in ASL, we do generally receive a request through our media department. Sometimes the request comes from other departments throughout the agency as well. We do frequently partner with the media department. Those requests are typically met by our staff interpreters. We generally do most of our translations in-house. Staff handle our translations using the agency provided equipment. Sometimes that equipment does not always satisfy the needs of the translation process. The translations are handled on the fly, generally need to be done very quickly. And our staff do have to handle some of those editing needs on their own. So the interpreters are doing some of their own editing for the videos that they create of ASL translations so that they can be returned to media quickly. Media will then add audio description, captioning, and other aspects of accessibility to what the translations the interpreters provide. And again, that is to expedite that process so that media can get that information loaded as quickly as possible. Some of the equipment that our agency approves to use does not allow for the expedited processing of translation requests. That is one challenge that we have faced. Our interpreters do address and fulfill those requests as quickly as possible. We do collect data regarding how many translation requests we receive and how much translation work we process on an annual basis. So we do monitor that work. Translation work that we have done with media and social media content, as well as general content across the agency, has continued to increase on an annual basis. We have also increased our use of CDIs to complete translation work as well, and that is continuing to increase annually. Because of the increasing demands, we have increased our number of staff and we are continuing to recruit for CDIs to join our staff. That is a significant part of the ASL department and something that we strive to do in terms of providing inclusive content and collaborate with Aaron's work and his team to ensure that everything is accessible. Aaron, I will turn it back to you if there's anything else you'd like to add about that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Couldn't have said it better. So continuing on, just to show the ASDB media team, we do regular reviews and we evaluate the accessibility of all of our digital platforms. We address, any identified issues, while of course adapting to new trends. In fact, most recently, we created a feedback loop and have hooked that into all of our public ASDB websites. This basically allows for users to submit their feedback if something may come across and is deemed non-accessible. So we made that available for the community to provide feedback, to which then we would evaluate, take a look at, and fix areas, where needed. So not trying to take up too much time here, but, in conclusion, by us embracing website and social media accessibility, we do foster an inclusive environment for all members of our community. It demonstrates our commitment to accessibility rights, legal compliance, and public perception. And with that said, I appreciate your attention and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate it. I do have a follow-up question. So one of the big concerns that has been brought to the board's attention is the accessibility of the policy. And I understand that policy changes, we'll say regularly, and it would be hard to do that in a ASL visual format. If someone internally, a staff person, or externally, a parent, would request that that was translated so that they would have access in ASL, is that something that you guys would consider doing?
That's a great question, Lynn. In fact, we actually did some test runs in relation to our online policies and how we could potentially make that more accessible in ASL. For this portion, because there's a lot of data tied to that, it might be a bit much, but to answer your question, yes, of course, we would be willing to accommodate in any way, shape, or form. Jennifer, if you could shed some light on our test run that we did.
So, Erin, I believe you have the specific numbers. However, we did look at if we were to pull a specific document and provide a translation of that, we looked at how long it would take to translate that document. So the entire process of translation. So including the amount of time it would take to translate, as well as what it might take to hire a contracted CDI, bring that individual in with our media team. They would need to analyze that policy, get clarification on meeting, really translate the entire thing into comprehensible language in American Sign Language. Because as most of you know, it's not just translating English, but it's also understanding that becomes, it needs to become a digestible piece of ASL content. It needs to be digestible by the community. And just like our procedure at the board meeting, it's really not accessible to the public sometimes. They come in and they don't quite know how to access these meetings. It may be that they're not entirely sure how to make a public comment. There's a paper at the front of the gym or the auditorium when we have in-person meetings, but they may not know what that paper is for. They may not understand whether the statement is going to be read if they were to submit it in writing. They tell me to write this out to make a public comment. But the announcement to fill that out is made online prior to the meeting. So when they get to the meeting, if they've missed that announcement, then it may be that they missed the opportunity to complete that form and submit their public comment. Generally, we don't see that comment or that announcement at the meeting. I share that with the community when I'm there. I make that announcement to people sitting around me. But that's not actually my responsibility. So is the meeting accessible? Well, there are interpreters there, yes. But it's still not an accessible process. So interpreting policy falls in the same vein. We can interpret the policy. We can put the policy into American Sign Language, yes. Is the policy therefore accessible? So we can hire an interpreter to interpret or translate that policy, yes. We can upload that translation to the website. Does it now become accessible? Is that the end of the story? Is that what the board is asking for? Are the interpreters that we hire policy experts to then translate that policy? And that may really cost a lot more. It's not just simply hiring any interpreter to translate a policy. So I suppose I'm answering your one question with several of my own. Okay, and yes, Linda, go ahead.
Linda here. I do see that there is a barrier, but what is it that is really obstructing our goal and our vision, providing an accessible policy? As a board member, when I receive policies, I admit it's difficult to follow. I represent the deaf community on this board, and I recognize that I am not the expert in the room, and I'm still learning. But for us to understand policy, there needs to be a large participation from the deaf community for them to fully engage in procedures. So yes, having it in ASL, obviously that is the obvious solution, yet there's more behind the scenes that people don't understand. And I think it's important for even our students to be engaged in how policies are created and why they're posted in this situation. So I think we always talk about the costs that are involved and all the resources needed, and I'm fully aware of that. I do this type of work on a daily basis, but I think this is a wonderful opportunity for CDIs to expand CDI employment opportunities at the agency. Maybe we can bring in Maria Murphy to work collaboratively to explain policies to us. And so I think that's just another perspective, especially for CDIs and work opportunities. The cost, we need to stop discussing the cost, put that aside for a moment. If that's always going to be the barrier, then accessibility is never at the forefront. So student achievement, deaf achievement rates need to happen because we start thinking differently on what accessibility looks like for our families, for our students, for our community members. Their policies aren't easy to read generally. So I do have to be assertive and ask Maria, can you please interpret what this means? And we have to start with making it accessible for the deaf community. So absolutely, I agree with your perspective, Jennifer. Thank you.
And this is Suke. I really appreciate your comparison, Dr. Scarborough, and I understand the complexity to this. But I think it is something that, as subject matter experts in deaf education and in blind education, it should be something we're striving for, to have that communication parity that is not always there. And I think you brought up some valid points, some very valid questions that's got me thinking now as well. But I'm just wondering what, I look at it from even a staff, an internal standpoint. When you have somebody whose primary language is ASL and English is their secondary language, and really that can apply in multiple situations. We've got folks on campus that are trilingual as well. The equity is not there as far as being able to understand the content in the same way as everybody else does. And so I am concerned about the cost involved in this, and I'm also concerned because policy changes. But I'm just wondering if, you know, this is something that we can continue to discuss and maybe work towards some way of leveling that playing field. I think we would have less issue if people were able to understand the policies and procedures that are in place. And I will be the first one to admit, as a state employee, they hand you this handbook and expect you to understand and read it and sign off on it. And it's not until later on that something comes up that you go back and you know, take a look at it again. But there should be a general understanding upon hire for staff. There should be a general understanding from an access standpoint for our community members and stakeholders as well. And I agree with Linda, you know, this is how we get students involved in the legislative process, is they have to learn these things somewhere. And a great place to start would be ASDB. But I'm not really asking a question here, but I do appreciate what you guys are sharing with us today. And I do think this is something we need to continue to find ways to make things like policy, which are not very digestible to anybody, more digestible.
Absolutely. I agree too. Reading policies, I get lost. You know, what does this mean? You know, sometimes I have to translate it myself by asking others questions. Do know that we are currently developing some technologies to better provide accessibility when it comes to policies. So just to make you aware, things like that are being actively worked on. Not quite ready, but we are aware, and perhaps this could, you know, have further discussions and figure out, you know, what is the best way we could present our policies, or access to those policies, things of that nature.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions before we move on? Thank you again. We're going to move on to 1.03, which is the call to the public for agendized items. We have received one, and I'm going to just quickly read it. It is from Soren Mikkelsen, current ASDB staff, and their comments read, "Dear board members, thank you for your time today. I would like to make a public comment regarding action points 6.01 and 6.02, addressing schedule changes for pay as well as proposed salary increases. Action point 6.01 seeks to make a conglomerate of therapeutic staff on one related services pay scale, reflecting now social workers, educational audiologists, psychologists, occupational, physical, and speech therapists. As a related service provider, my steps for pay have been recalibrated. We will soon be recognized for years of service with the agency, which I appreciate very much. We can now move up steps. I wanted to share that during the recalibration process, there are staff whose rate either did not change or went below what they currently make. For those in this situation, they would need to acquire more years of experience before their income increases. Historically, a cost of living adjustment, or COLA, was the only way related service providers could increase their salary. Action point 6.02 details plans for proposed salary increases. Teachers, some certified staff, and other part-time, full-time will be receiving a COLA, and it's much deserved. Related services and other certified staff will not receive a COLA due to our recalibrated steps. While the agency is moving in the right direction, I would further challenge it to understand that the cost of living goes up and somewhat indefinitely for everyone. COLAs recognize this, and when offered, communicate a sense of gratitude for doing a job we all love to do. ASDB has a clear goal in bringing forth the best when educating our children who are deaf, hard of hearing, visually impaired, or deafblind. ASDB could equally have a clear goal about committing to their employees' financial well-being. Is it possible to consider extending the COLA to all certified and non-certified, whether full-time or part-time, including related service providers? I appreciate your time to review my comment, and thank you for your commitment to our community by being here today. Kindly, Soren Mickelson. Moving on to 1.04, information item, the superintendent's report. Superintendent Reichman.
Now, can you see me? Yes, we can. Good afternoon, Board President Kneifel, members of the Board of Directors, Assistant Superintendent Kachoff, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, and ASDB community. Welcome to our July 20th, 2023 board meeting. I would like to say thank you to the board members for your flexibility in transitioning our scheduled in-person meeting over to Zoom. We needed to do that this afternoon because we were having electrical issues at the PDSD theater that we call the SPAC. Thank you all for your flexibility. I have two items that I would like to briefly mention before I give my report. The first is that I'd like to let you know that we do still have 2 vacancies on our board of directors. If you know of anyone who may be interested, please do encourage them to apply with the governor's boards and committees office. The second is that I'd like to let you know that we will soon start the search for our new permanent assistant superintendent. Part of that search is seeking feedback from the community. I will be setting up town hall meetings coming up in October. There will be one in Tucson, one in Phoenix, and one online on Zoom. I would greatly appreciate your assistance in planning these town halls and encouraging our community members to attend and participate in these town halls. During the town halls, I will give a brief history of what has happened so far at ASDB. And then I will ask for input on the qualifications, the appropriate qualifications for the next assistant superintendent. With that, I will move on to my reports. If you recall, during our May board meeting, I talked about the theme, accountability. And during that meeting, I shared a story with all of you about everybody, nobody, somebody, and what was the fourth one? Anybody. And essentially about not completing a project. So I want to reiterate the point of accountability. And I would like to go back to that theme of accountability to emphasize again the importance of accountability. And if you remember at the last board meeting, we talked about our operating principles, accountability, collaboration, and transparency. The importance of accountability in supporting the other two operating principles. Who are we accountable to? Primarily, we are accountable to our students. We provide our students with opportunities to learn and grow so that when they graduate from high school, they are then ready for life after high school. They may choose to go to college or go into a career or a job. And we are also accountable to the parents and families of those students. We are also accountable to our teachers, our staff, our leaders. We are accountable to all of you, the ASDB Board of Directors. We have accountability to the governor and the governor's office as well, and the state legislature. And finally, we have accountability to the citizens of Arizona. So the question then becomes, how do you know that we are accountable? One response to that question is to look at our strategic plan. You, the board of directors, developed that strategic plan. And we recently completed the 2023 strategic plan report. So if you look in your board packet available on board docs under the superintendent's report, you will see the 2023 strategic plan report. In that report, we have, as you recall, 4 pillars. Excellent communication and relationships, outstanding student development, superb organizational culture, and effective resource management. If you've taken the time to review that report, you will have seen that under each of the pillars, with the priorities, we also have metrics. Most of those metrics have 3 years worth of data. For the first time, we can really start looking at that data, analyzing, and drawing comparisons with that data. We may be even able to begin interpreting some of that data. I'm going to give you some examples of the different metrics and data from the strategic plan. I also hope that you become curious and that you take some time to read through that strategic plan report and start to think about the data that is being presented there. In terms of excellent communication and relationships, most of the metrics are focused on satisfaction. We do satisfaction surveys. We see the results of that satisfaction survey. We have a score of 1 being the least satisfied and 1 through 10, excuse me, 10 being the most satisfied. Looking at last year's data in 2022 and 2023, the parent satisfaction data was an average of about an 8 in terms of all of our educational programs, campus-based, early learning, and itinerant services, about a score of an 8, which is the same as 2 and 3 years ago. So it does seem that we are pretty consistent in terms of parent satisfaction. Looking at special education directors' satisfaction data, last year, the 2022-2023 school year, you can see that in our early learning program, we averaged about a level 7 in satisfaction. Campuses averaged about an 8, and itinerant services about a 7. So again, about the same as 2 and 3 years ago. There is some data from the community stakeholders, but we do not currently have 3 years worth of that data. We can see that community stakeholders are less satisfied with the agency. We also do employee or staff satisfaction surveys. And this is looking at whether staff are satisfied with their jobs. Overall, staff satisfaction last school year in 2022 to 2023 did decline to about a 6.5 compared to the previous 2 and 3 years. We also look at satisfaction with the superintendent's performance, and you can see that last year, satisfaction fell in that area as well compared to 2 years ago and 3 years ago. The second pillar is outstanding student development. We have some really interesting metrics there and some interesting data. I took some time to really look at that data and analyze it yesterday to try to understand our own data a bit better. The first 2 metrics are focusing on language outcomes for birth to 3 and preschool for our deaf and hard of hearing children. If you read that, it says that last year in birth to 3, beginning language with early intervention, after 6 months of intervention, the average baby is acquiring 7 months worth of language at 6 months. So, and that was the same as about a year and 2 years ago. That's not just a struggle for ASDB, it is a struggle for other organizations that nationally is not available. It is something that we are continuing to work on. Looking next at post-school outcomes. This is for after our students graduate from high school. Our students who graduated last year, we do know about 100% of our students. We got data from all of them. Of those students, 41% are employed or in a post-secondary education program. So college, university, or a technical or trade school. So some type of higher education. So again, 41%. Compared to the itinerant students, for itinerant students, we do not have 100% of the data. We only got about 32% response from students and have data from about 32% of those high school graduates. Of those, 73% are either working or they're in a post-secondary education program of some kind. We also have metrics on our state assessments, and these are standardized assessments. We have for our campuses in both English and math, for Tucson campus and Phoenix campus. Looking at both of those campuses, most of our students fall into the category of FARS fall below. Compared to itinerant students, and again, we do not have comprehensive data on all of our itinerant students. In order to get that data, we have to request it from the school districts, and they have to then give it to us for us to analyze. Some school districts do that and others do not. So we have some of the data, but not all. Of those students for whom we have data, you really have to look at that carefully, and it's very interesting. I'm not entirely sure what it means, but it is broken down by 3rd grade, 8th grade, and 10th grade. And again, English and math. Looking at 3rd grade and 8th grade, students are either falls far below or minimally proficient. So somewhere in there, in both 3rd and 8th grade, either falls far below or minimally proficient. But then if you look at 10th grade, almost all of those students are falls far below. And I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if it means anything per se, but again, we don't have enough years of data and enough comprehensive data to draw a true comparison. Again, we also have student satisfaction surveys. And those students on our campuses do take the time to complete those, and we look at their satisfaction with their academics, their school safety, the school culture, and we do have data from our students for last year. Our students were less satisfied than the previous 2 years. Next is superb organizational culture, our 3rd pillar. We looked at professional development that occurred at various trainings that occurred in 2022 and 2023. There was a significant increase in the number of training opportunities for our staff. And most of that training focused on 3 things: educational strategies, curriculum, and leadership. Another metric under Pillar 3 included teacher diversity and staff demographics. For example, we have approximately 2,100 students all together, and this includes our early learning program, campus-based programs, and itinerant services. So all total about 2,100 who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, or visually impaired. If you then look at our teacher demographics and who they are, we have approximately 220 teachers. 42 of those teachers are deaf or hard of hearing, or blind, or visually impaired, or deafblind. Most of them are deaf or hard of hearing. So think of that. So it's about 20% of our teachers. When we look at our staff, so all of our staff, we've got a total of about 700 or slightly more. What we have documented says that staff self-report on their identification, and 136 identify with a known disability. Our fourth pillar is effective resource management. There are several metrics. One of them is employee vacancies or vacant positions. Last year, we filled about half of those vacant positions. So that does show the challenge that we continue to face in terms of recruiting and trying to fill our vacancies. Some of those who we hired seemed to find us because they were looking for us online. They looked at our webpage. They checked directly with our directors or other supervisors. And they found that information on our website and decided to apply. We do have metrics on staff ratios. So for example, on our campus-based programs, both Tucson and Phoenix, we have approximately 4.6 teachers per, 4.6 students per teacher. In itinerant services, we have approximately 13.3 students per one teacher. We also have metrics on the master facilities plan that show our progress toward completing the specs of that. We also have metrics on our fleet management that demonstrates how we are using our fleet of vehicles and if we are using them efficiently. We have other metrics that look at our budget. The budget looks at the percentage of money allocated to instruction, to facilities, transportation, etc. And we can see that most of our money is going to instruction. We have metrics on cost per student, broken down by each campus, as well as itinerant services and early learning program. So again, you can find those details in the report. So, looking at our 2023 strategic plan, what does that really tell us? It tells us that, first of all, we have a lot of tools at our disposal. This is one of the tools that we are able to use in order to evaluate the agency's performance. We have other tools as well, but the strategic plan is one tool. This report has 3 years worth of data. And in 3 years worth of data, we can start using that to analyze the information and start asking questions about what we are doing as an agency. We can also look at specific metrics and see if those metrics can give us additional information that we may need. If those metrics are not giving us what we need, then we need to change the metrics. They're also giving us data and information that we need in order to how to view the performance of the agency. With 3 years worth of data, we can establish some targets for each of our metrics. I'm going to recommend to our leadership team that we start doing just that. For you as the board of directors, as well as the ASDB community, there is a lot of information that is being provided with the strategic plan report. The assistant superintendent reports as well. For both of them, if you read through those reports, you will notice that each of their reports has different activities that relate back to the strategic plan. So you can cross-reference the activities that we are doing with what is noted in the strategic plan. I encourage you to do that. We also have a finance committee. We have that report included as well. There's a lot of financial data there. I encourage you to look at that as part of our accountability, being accountable with that information. And it is not just our board materials that we provide you. You also have additional tools that you can look at for ASDB and how we're performing. And also be able to answer the question, is ASDB doing everything that we need to be doing in order to provide the best education and support for all of the students that we serve? Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. I have a couple of follow-up maybe comments and questions, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the board for questions as well. A couple of things stand out to me, and you and I have had conversations in regards to this. I really think that part of our data collection needs to look at when these kids are coming into us and where their baselines are starting at. I wholeheartedly agree we should be collecting the information. I know it's hard to get the information from the co-ops because we are not the LEA of record for those students. We're providing itinerant services, but I do think it's important for us to show how we are impacting those itinerant services, first of all. That's one thing, but then for the campus-based students, I really think we need to look and do comparison studies of kids that start with us on campus and stay with us, and kids that come in at different points within their education and show their progression as well. Numbers are only as good as the story behind them, as far as I'm concerned. So we really need to look at where a kid starts and where a kid finishes, not just as the whole, but as groups of students that are more similar to each other as far as where they are in language development and those types of things. I think that's key to making sure that we are highlighting the good things that ASDB is doing and not just showing where kids are falling on that bell curve when it comes to state testing. I will get off that soapbox and I will open it up to see if there are any further questions from the rest of the board. Seeing none, I will say thank you again, Superintendent Reichman, and we will move on.
Thank you.
We will move on to 1.05, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instructions Report, Acting Assistant Superintendent Ketchup. Did I say that right? With a name like Kneifel, I appreciate that.
No worries. Well, good afternoon, Board President Kneifel, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, and the ASDB community. To start my report, first, I do want to thank Dr. Jennifer Scarborough and her interpreter team for putting together a phenomenal two-day Interpreter Summit this week. Over 70 ASDB interpreters attended. 27 remained behind for a 3-day-long intensive training. That's a first part of a year-long mentoring program. That mentoring program has been custom designed to apply the integrated model for interpreting, which was developed by Betty Colonmos. It was awesome to see all the agency interpreters in one place, to see them in person, watching them learn and collaborate together. And the entire training was also done in ASL. So I'm a big Arizona Cardinal fan since they came here in the 80s. And similar to football, I always like to look at each new school year kind of like a new football season. And what that means is sometimes the players on the team remain the same. Sometimes you lose good players and you get sad. And sometimes you add great players and you get excited about the upcoming season. For this season at ASDB, I am very excited about the new talent that we've added, which includes some homegrown staff stepping into leadership positions. All right, so let me introduce to you the leadership additions to Team ASDB for the 2023-2024 season. First, I'd like to welcome Scott Madston as the new CTE director. Scott comes to us from PTSD, where he's been a teacher since 2017. Scott is currently pursuing his doctorate in education leadership and innovation and has a master's degree in science technology, graphic information technology. Next in our starting lineup, coming to ASDB via the Tucson Unified School District, we have Greer Martin Parrish, who will be joining us as the Director of Itinerant Services for Region 1. Greer has over 10 years experience as an itinerant TVI, and most recently has been an assistant director for the Tucson Unified School District in their exceptional education department. Next up, joining Team ASDB via the Alabama School for the Deaf, we have Paul Sanders, who's going to be the next principal for the Tucson campus. In addition to being an experienced principal, Paul also has over 16 years experience as a social studies teacher, as well as experience being on various committees at a state level when he worked in Georgia. Rising through the ranks at ASDB, I'm excited to introduce Michael Olivier as the new director for the Organizational Development Division, or the ODD. Mike started his career at ASDB in 2007. He then left and traveled around the United States, teaching at various places, including being a supervisor of the ASL department at the Marie Phillips School. He returned to ASDB as a supervising teacher for the ELP preschool, and most recently was a curriculum resource specialist with the ODD. Sarah Sotilli, our new SPED director, has already been introduced at a previous board meeting, but we are very excited that she is part of our team this year. In some non-contract positions, I'm excited to say that Karen Tallis, a former ASDB IEP specialist, accepted the position of assistant principal for ASB in Tucson. Sabra Taylor is joining the PDSD campus as an assistant principal. She comes from Colorado, where she has been in the education field for over 10 years, and she started her educational career as an ASL tutor. Sabra also has 2 MA degrees, 1 in linguistics and 1 in deaf education. Megan Boyle will be moving from a teacher at PDSD to an instructional coach at PDSD. Kimberly Atkins is moving from a teacher in Tucson to be their new Tucson IEP specialist. She'll be joining Abby Wagner, who's a former PDSD teacher, who will be doing that job at PDSD. And last but not least, I'm excited to say that Paya Benson, who was a former ASDB regional director, is returning to ASDB to be an instructional coach for the ELP. I'd also like to add that all things considered, our teacher retention for this last year wasn't too bad. Our PDSD elementary team did see the highest turnover. The PDSD middle school and high school didn't have any changes that I would say are out of the ordinary. The ELP only had minor changes in Phoenix. The Tucson campus stayed relatively steady, and the same can be said for our itinerant teachers. I personally want to thank every teacher and staff member who decided to come back and be part of the ASDB team for 2023-2024. Arizona has a teacher shortage. I know you have plenty of other opportunities, so thank you for deciding to stay here. It's appreciated, and please reach out to me if there's anything I can do to continue to support you. In conclusion, towards the end of last school year, we started on focused initiatives like getting cell phones to our itinerant staff, updating our language policy, which we hope to have to the board at the next meeting. We also started putting systems in place so we could provide the SLPI assessment to staff to assess and then assist with their ASL growth. This year, we will continue to implement those initiatives. We're also focusing more on collective professional development for itinerant staff and our day school staff. For example, on July 31st, all itinerant and site-based teachers will be getting together for a kickoff event. Our DHH teachers will be meeting in Phoenix, and our TVIs will be meeting in Tucson. Lastly, to help leadership have a proactive instead of reactive start to the year, all leaders on the educational side of the agency, including myself, are in the process of finalizing our 90-day plans. These plans will be accessible for staff in the community to take a look at. We're going to be transparent. And I need to stress the purpose of these plans is not to penalize anybody, but to help us all stay focused to the vision and mission of the agency as we start the new year. Thank you all, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Oren. Any questions from the board? Go ahead, Lyd.
Okay, I have a question and a comment. But first, I want to welcome all of our new staff. Welcome back, Paya. Glad to have you back for sure. sounds like we're gonna have hit the road running at the beginning of the year. So any support we can give you, let us know. Question, and this will probably end up with Jennifer or somebody. In the report, it mentioned the dual role of the interpreters as IEP team members versus interpreting IEP meetings. Can you briefly explain that?
So that would be something that I would have to defer to Dr. Scarborough. I think what we want to make sure is that everybody understands what they bring to the IEP meeting, their role within the IEP meeting, and that child's education, and to have that very clear so everybody can be a meaningful part of the IEP process and speak specifically to why they're part of that kid's educational career.
Good. I was happy to see that. And also I would like to commend the ELP program. I saw in here that it was reported that on average 8.35 months growth over 6 months. That's amazing. Good job, you guys. I've worked in early childhood and that's the direction we have to go. Our kids can't make 6 months in 6 months. They have to make more. They're playing catch up all the time. So good job.
They're an amazing team.
Yes, they are.
Any other questions?
Hi, Oren. This is Linda. Thank you, Oren, for that wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed your report, your introduction and welcoming of the new staff, and your commitment that is unwavering in trying to elevate our community. Our goal is to provide the best equitable opportunities, and that's always a challenge, and we will get there. I would like to go back to the early learning program. As we know, the best education happens in early programming. And unfortunately, we are facing a shortage of instructors and teachers in K-12. So can you speak to how you plan on transitioning students from our ELP into our schools, or our residential schools, or our day programs, and how we're able to maintain our student population here at ASDB? Is there some sort of programming that you are planning? How are you dealing with the transition of our early learning program students into our agency?
So first of all, thank you for the kind words. I do appreciate it. I think a place where we need to start is to ensure that our day schools understand what our ELP programs are doing, and for our ELP programs to know what's happening at our day schools. I think the more that we tighten that up, we can see who the kids are in the ELP program and make sure that we have day schools that can meet the needs of the majority of the kids. So I do think there's been a disconnect in the past of there's the ELP, then there's the day schools, and then there's the itinerant program. But I do not feel that we have it to the point where each group can truly talk about what the other group is doing. And I feel that hurts us because in IEP meetings, parents and teachers might not be getting a clear picture of what we can provide here. So I think that's the starting point, is to make sure that all of us can truly talk about the agency. One item I'm really excited about is this new CTE director. I personally feel that if we can build CTE programs on our campuses that are exciting and can lead to positive post-school outcomes, parents and educators might see that the day schools are a better placement. So we're, Scott Madston is really passionate about this, and we both believe that if we build it, they will come. So those are the two items at the moment I'm working on, is trying to increase the communication within the agency, and then to get Scott started on correctly so he can build a world-renowned CTE program here at the agency.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Oren.
Any other questions for Oren? Think you're off the hook. Thank you, Oren. We will move on to agenda item 1.06, information item, Assistant Superintendent of Agency Operations and Support Services, Assistant Superintendent Cooper.
Good afternoon, Board President Kneifel, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Kachoff, members of the board, ASDB community, and staff members. Each of the directors have provided to you their departmental reports. There is no additional information that has come forth since those reports were provided to you last week. To sustain our educational endeavors, we understand the importance of financial stability. The strategic plan outlines strategies which we're working on to optimize all of our resources, looking at improving our operational efficiency, as well as seeking additional funding opportunities to support all of our educational programs. And in support of ASDB's priorities, most of the work that the team does is tied to Pillar 3, superb organizational culture, and Pillar 4, effective resource management. As Superintendent Reichman briefly discussed, we've provided updates on both of those pillars, which have been included in the board materials. More specifically, in the strategic plan is Objective 4.2, which is the development of a long-range master facility plan, which also ties into our most recent sunset audit that we had in 2022. We have not yet received an update on that 6-month follow-up that the auditor's office did back in March. However, as it pertains to the master facility plan, we are starting to see results of multiple years of deferred maintenance that has been presented in the board work study session that was conducted by our Director of Operations, Albert Duff. Multiple buildings are beginning to show on our campuses excessive signs of wear and tear. We're also seeing some of our critical infrastructure fail, such as the lighting and electrical systems within the SPAC building on our Phoenix campus, as Superintendent Reichman mentioned, thus the reason why we're doing our meeting via Zoom today. Our operations team is working diligently to correct and maintain the facilities, but there's only so much that we can do internally. The solution actually requires major renovations and redesigns of our facilities. And again, this is why the master facility plan is so critical to the success of our students' education and will need to be developed this fiscal year. It is a priority for not only my team, but the entire team for the agency as well. In order to create and implement the plan for ASDB, we've hired LEA Architecture to assist with the development of this plan. The firm was able to thoroughly review and do a walkthrough for both of our Tucson and Phoenix campuses and have drafted some initial considerations, which we have included in my board report. These initial considerations were reviewed by multiple leaders within the agency, as well as staff, who are our subject matter experts in their respective fields. Operations took the subject matter experts' input and made necessary changes based on those original recommendations by LEA Architecture. Over the next 2 months, our leadership team will review the master facility plan scope of work and determine what the budget for the final product will be. We're also looking at some potential funding that we will need. We'll be submitting requests to the Arizona Department of Administration Capital Improvement Plan, and we'll also be submitting a legislative decision package, which is also known as a funding issue. The total order of magnitude is subject to change as we continue to refine the plan during our design process. The plan will also take multiple years to complete, and ASDB is working with the architectural firm to develop an accurate timeline. Please note that the Tucson campus is expected to have a reduction of utilized space from 326,000 square feet to approximately 180,000 square feet. We have already began working with an appraiser to determine the value of any surplus space and buildings as a result of the plan. This will assist the ASDB board in determining the best use of our surplus property. And in order to align the process for the master facility plan with Pillar 1 of our strategic plan, I want to make sure I mention a few additional points. One is that we're working towards the development of a stakeholder survey that will be released to parents, students, and staff. The survey will evaluate the additional design considerations that need to be incorporated into our master facility plan. 2, LEA Architecture will also create the initial floor plans as well as the intended use of the buildings to be presented in town halls on each of the campuses that we plan on doing. This will ensure we have full transparency into the future of the campuses. We also want to make sure we obtain stakeholder feedback from the community and ensure that our designs accommodate the specific needs of our students. We do not need to recreate some of the information, and so we'll be utilizing some of the best practices that were developed by other schools for the deaf and the blind. We plan to have that survey and stakeholder feedback along with initial designs ready for review in the November board meeting. And this will allow you to vote on the initial designs so LEA Architecture and the agency can finalize our master facility plan and begin the true implementation in July of 2024, pending funding availability. So now that the budget legislation has been finalized, the team is continuing to work on developing the budget for 2024 as our new fiscal year began on July 1st. And our agency budget submission is due on or before September 1st to the Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting. We just recently received final amounts from the state on our agency's total operating budget. And that total budget with all funding sources included is $67.1 million. We will be submitting 4 funding issues to the state, which one I have already mentioned ties into the master facility plan. The second will be seeking ongoing transportation support to help pay for the contracted cost we continue to incur resulting from our LEA status change. The third funding issue we will be working on is within our available cash balance as referred to in our finance report there is about $561,000 in our telecommunications fund, which was left over from the 2019 funding we received to expand our early learning program for birth to 3. And as you are aware, we were not able to hire all of the positions we were allotted in that first year. Hence, the money is still left over from those general funds. Our fourth funding issue relates to the Foundation for the Blind Children contract that we have for our preschool students. As you've heard me say on multiple occasions, our daily rate for the institutional vouchers for our visually impaired students is less than the daily contracted rate that we have with FBC. And just to put into context, the fiscal year 2024 voucher rate for the 144 days for our contracted preschools, for our preschool students is a little over $199. However, the contracted rate with FBC is right about $212. So in addition to the daily instruction that we're contracting services with FBC for our preschool students, we're also paying them to do psychology evaluations, providing one-on-one nursing services, as well as transportation. All of that we're projecting to be a shortfall of over $500,000. Last but not least, I do want to give updates on where we are with phase 2 of the compensation restructure project. And as you are aware, the goal of the multi-year project has been to ensure a consistent and equitable practice when we're reviewing our compensation. So in summary, the year's compensation adjustments as noted in the board report, we are looking at 1, eliminating the certified salary schedule, and staff would be either moved to the related services or teaching salary schedule. 2, we're also looking at eliminating the educational audiologist and school psychologist salary schedules and moving those staff to the related services salary schedule. Staff members on those salary schedules will have the ability to move each year. However, it is subject to legislative budget availability and board approval. To ensure consistency amongst these schedules that we're consolidating, staff would be granted up to 20 years of certified experience and be capped at a doctoral education level. I do want to note that all staff will not experience an increase this year, as some of those staff are already making more than the step that they would be placed on. However, we will not be decreasing anybody's pay. The other additional recommendation is that drivers and those staff that are paid from the classified salary schedule in grades 10 and above, we're proposing would receive a percentage increase for each year that they have worked at ASDB. This is consistent with what we did last year for those in grades 1 through 9. And last but not least, we're also proposing that eligible teachers receive their step increase, and all other staff not in a temporary status would receive a 2% cost of living adjustment. As it pertains to the cost of living adjustment increase, in the near future, we will be reviewing how the structure is currently and determine if there is a need to modify our current practices, which will include determining if all certified and non-certified staff would receive the COLA increase, as we know the economy and cost of living consistently changes. Any compensation changes resulting from this phase of the project would become effective in August 2023, contingent upon board approval. And those proposed items are on our consent agenda as 6.01 and 6.02. For the new year, we've already began identifying other salary adjustments we'll be looking at. And we are currently working on updating the time frame, as I mentioned in our last board meeting, to prepare for pay increase recommendations and or salary schedules to the board before staff are issued contracts and before they leave on summer break. So that way any pay increases would be reflected on their following year employment contracts. That wraps up my report, and there are no other updates to provide at this time. I am open to answer any questions or address any comments that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Shana. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure that they're appropriate for you specifically, but I'm going to ask, and then you can tell me if I need to wait and have this discussion a little bit later. In looking at the overall pay schedule changes, the salary changes and things like that, where I'm seeing some discrepancy and have some questions and possibly some concern is, and maybe it's just not explained well, and I'll start with that. For the classified special recruitment salaries, it doesn't seem like the grade level is necessarily in line with some of the responsibilities, and I see a huge discrepancy in some of the grade levels. And if you want, I can give you an example. For example, an intervener is a grade 5 with an hourly pay rate of $18. And we have an ASL instructor at a grade 9 with a salary base rate of $17.39 an hour. And I do understand from handling this with the commission that a lot of this is based on how a position is classified within the system. And then that grade is based on that. I'm wondering if there is a way to categorize these different positions within those position categories to show maybe the difference. Because I think looking at this just by grade level, it seems very inequitable.
I am making notes as you speak, and I will review with our HR team.
Okay. And I know that can't be done, but it is something I think we should look at because I really do see a huge discrepancy here. And then I just had another question on the proposed salary increases that was kind of a yellow flag for me. In the documents that we received in board docs, the breakdown of the number of staff affected, the salaries, the benefits, and then the total. I'm assuming that the salaries, that's not total salaries, that's the total of the increases. And that the actual total at the end is the total of the salary increases and the benefit increases, correct?
That is correct.
Could you clarify to me why there is such a difference between the total amount between the teacher group and the classified staff in a grade 10 or above group?
The teacher group would only be those that are not capped at the 20 years of experience. So it's not all teachers. And then the classified staff in grades 10 and above is again referring to those in grades 10 and above that would be getting the years of service based on their experience here at ASDB.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. I appreciate that. that was all for me as far as my questions go. Does anybody else on the board have a question for Assistant Superintendent Cooper?
Oh, and President Kneifel, before we move on to additional questions, I think our Executive Director of Human Resources is prepared now to answer or address your comment regarding possible inequities regarding the classified special recruitment salary schedule. Are you there, Anita?
I see her. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm here. Good afternoon, President Kneifel. So what we can do is we can provide you a listing of the classified positions by grade, so you can see that along with the special recruitment rates as well as the salary ranges, because not all classified positions are on the special recruitment rate salary schedule. In addition, we made a change to there was a title on that salary schedule that was labeled trainer, and we retitled it to identify ASL instructor to more align with what they're doing. However, we also know that this coming year we'll need to assess that market study for that position. So we're not there yet with that position. Hopefully that can help clarify some of your questions.
Thank you, Anita. That does clarify some of my questions. It does make me feel good that you guys recognize this and are looking at competitive wages comparison to look at these positions. And I do know, again, when you look at the state system, they're classified by different things and the grades are different pays within those classifications. And it might be clearer, I'm looking at the board doc that we received. It might be clearer if things were sort of classified together. So there's more, because I think when people look at this, there's a natural tendency to compare, and a grade 5 in one category is not the same as a grade 5 in another category. And I think that there needs to be some reference to that. And I would also say, looking at some of these positions, we may need to consider a reclass based on the work they're doing. And the other question I had, and maybe Anita, you can answer this for me. In lieu of education, are we giving credit for professional years of experience for some people? For example, like a deaf mentor.
So if the deaf mentor, let me look at the schedule real quick.
I'm just pulling that out of the air, to be honest with you. That was, it's just.
Okay, so deaf mentor is on the special recruitment rate. Those classifications on that schedule, that is what we bring them in at.
Okay. Okay. And then do you then compensate them for any additional education and or certification and or years of experience?
Not on the classified special recruitment schedule.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You've answered my questions. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay. This is Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can. Okay. Shayna, thanks. This isn't really a question yet, but I was looking at the master facility plan and seeing that the Tucson renovations would be about $50 million, I think the projection is. And I remember when we did the work study, Albert was it was very clear and transparent as he talked about student enrollment, and particularly in Tucson. And I think in relation, particularly around how Tucson being an institutional setting, or at least as it was in the beginning, and with a strong residential component. And I see with the renovation that the new campus would have a very small residential, one building would house seemingly all the students. I'm wondering if there's been question to the feasibility of such a major major project, particularly if it's only going to be about half the size of the current campus. If the local area supports day programming to that level, and it will for the long-term future after such an expensive facility plan. And if it's interesting that there's already been discussion about reducing the size of the campus, because that's always been being a Tucsonan, I see the campus and I've been around it for over 20 years. So that's always been an issue that I've had, is that how sprawling it is for such a low student census. And I understand getting the architectural firm in to do some renderings and have a plan before the stakeholders in the town halls. But I'm just not certain that such a huge project is necessary to support such a small group of students. And I'm wondering if there is a plan that somehow would support increased recruitment, because you're still talking about the it's primarily going to be a day program, primarily for deaf, because there's very few blind students. It's barely even a blind schools anymore. So are there enough deaf students in Pima County to support that type of renovation without having any type of expanded residential programming? And going to the legislature, I mean, I understand that's the approach to go for this type of big funding. But I guess I'm wondering if have there been any discussions of other possible facilities, locations, existing buildings that would not cost $50 million?
I appreciate your comments. Let me see if our Director of Operations, I see he hopped on here. Albert, do you want to go ahead and chime in a little bit?
Absolutely. Board Member Gordon, those are very good questions. And I do believe that there is still sustainability within the Tucson campus region, especially when you look at, as you said, it does have a residential component, and we do still have to meet those needs of the students around the state. So we still have to have some sort of component there. With regards to the cost, those are initial rough order magnitude. As we get into more of the details of what each building would need, those costs will fluctuate. And as we begin to work through the plan, we'll be able to determine additional programmatic aspects, which are also part of that plan, such as what Assistant Superintendent Ketchoff was referencing, being able to have a more expanded CTE program and having that in multiple areas throughout the state so we can better serve students. And also looking at feasibility of purchasing another area while still maintaining our own. That was discussed with the architectural and engineering firm, and looking at the condition of many of those areas would require the same amount of funding plus the cost of purchasing. So by doing this, we're able to avoid that cost of purchasing since we own the property. And then we're able to better maximize our dollars with our current owned facilities. In addition, that $50 million would be spread over many, many years. The initial ask that we have for both campuses that is being presented as part of the decision package is approximately $21 million. That does still seem quite extensive and expensive. But I think that we have to look at the opportunities to also generate some of that revenue ourselves through the surplus property and the potential sale of that surplus property, while still maintaining the ability to expand if things were to change with our demographic ability, which have been considered and are part of the initial designs. I have them tentatively drawn up for what the campus maps would look like. And that will be presented in the next board report, in the next board meeting, for you to be able to look in detail to ask more of those detailed questions. But I do believe that putting the additional funding into our buildings that we own, reducing our footprint and being more strategic and precise with what buildings we're going to keep and maintain will lower our operational costs per student, will reflect and meet the Auditor General's recommendation of having a long-range facility and capital plan, and then also having the ability for ourselves to potentially, pending board approval, be able to offer that through the sale of a property in order to generate our own revenue. And hopefully that this doesn't cost the taxpayers anything directly or cost them a limited amount. So there's, I think it's still very much in the works, but I think trying to expand or centralize that, just say on the Phoenix campus, and not have a Tucson region. We don't have the land space in order to do that on the Phoenix campus. So we'd have to purchase additional land, which is expensive. And then purchasing a different school within the Tucson region, as noted, from discussion, would cost a high amount and still tentative improvement to meet the specific needs of our VI, blind, deaf, and hard hearing population.
Now, did you mention selling some of the existing property? Did I understand that right?
That is correct. That would be pending board approval, obviously.
Right.
That's not something that I would be able to determine. We have ordered the appraisal. So we do have a determined area that we would consider for sale or even as a negotiating point with the legislature as an option. That appraisal will be reviewed, actually is starting next week. And then that will be given to the board to be able to have for your consideration. So it would take the campus roughly about 50% in size. As a reference point, the Phoenix campus is 162,000 square feet and currently accommodates over 250 students. The Phoenix campus, or sorry, the Tucson campus would be reduced down to 180,000, so approximately the same size, but as noted, only serves roughly between 125 to 150 students, depending on the school year. With that, though, there is the consideration that whenever you do have blind and deaf on the same campus, it does require additional space because of the fact that you have to have a blind classroom and a deaf classroom in order to meet those needs. So it is justifiable to have the same amount of space in the Phoenix campus and the Tucson campus, even though the Tucson campus has half the population.
And right now, the campus in Tucson is what, about 70 acres?
64 is our current foothold. We occupy about 38 of it. And if you give me 1 second, the proposed size is that would potentially be for surplus property. There's an error happening, so I can't pull that up, but it's approximately about 15 acres worth of land. But we'll have a more tightened version after we go through that with the appraiser, as well as with the architectural and engineering firm. I would like to know this is not being done in isolation, as noted in Assistant Superintendent Cooper's report, is that we do have a list of subject matter experts that we have within the area that are providing information not just on what's best for deaf students, what's best for blind students, but what is best collectively for all the students on our population, and whatever future programs could be considered. Also, one thing that does also make a note here is that does make Tucson a little different, is that we do house the Region 3 office itinerant program, as well as a very lofty or a very large blind program that also has our APH program that ships all of the material from the APH program throughout the entire state. So the Tucson campus still is making those considerations and has plans for where those departments would go. As yes, it is a campus, but it's also a central hub for a lot of programs that help us throughout the state of Arizona, also including our business services team. The majority of business services, the majority of information technology are all housed within the Tucson campus. So I think it behooves us to maintain that same property also for historical purposes.
And do we find that having administrative central offices in Tucson is effective for general operations as compared to administrative offices in Phoenix?
I can only comment my opinion on that. So that would be something you might have to ask Superintendent Reichman. My personal opinion is that due to the technology we have today, having some of it decentralized and actually having administrators on 2 different areas to maintain that is a benefit. That's my opinion. I know that it does reduce some visibility in some considerations, as maybe Tucson doesn't see the Phoenix administrators as often, or vice versa. But I think that we expand our ability to attract different kinds of labor, such as right now our Region 1 director, who I'm very excited to have on board with us, Greer, is actually located on our Tucson campus. And even though she's serving the North, she is effective and able to utilize the resources we have now to provide supervision and direction throughout the state. And, you know, that if we were limited to, say, the Tucson or the Phoenix location only, we may not have someone such as Greer join our team. And so I think it gives us more flexibility to actually hire different administrators throughout the state. As a Tucsonan, I would not live in Phoenix. And I don't think you as a Tucsonan would either. And so I think it gives us a lot of flexibility for that.
All right, last question. And I appreciate you answering these off the cuff. The reduction, I guess, what, 140,000 square foot reduction. I'm assuming there's a selection of buildings that would no longer be used, either, I guess, rented or leased to agencies or companies or schools or whomever. Do those buildings need their own extensive renovation? I'm assuming they would, before they'd be in condition to be able to be leased.
So that's a good question. That would be part of the negotiation process, as well as the determining value within the appraisal. We would not advocate for doing renovations prior to sale. If the board chose to keep the property and then recommend to go ahead and lease out the property, then we'd have to go back and advocate for additional funding to renovate those to bring them up to the standard. That is true. What I would like to add to that, though, is that the selection of buildings would allow for the campus, if it were the section of the campus were to be sold, would be, how do I put this? We would select those buildings and this building specifically for marketability. So that way, if someone came in and they wanted to do, say, a complete demolition of all of those buildings and build a new structure, that is something that would be an option for them. More than likely, the selection of land would be sold more for the land. It's convenience to I-10, considering it's right off I-10 and Speedway, as well as its convenience to both the University of Arizona and Pima Community College. So I think that there's a lot of marketability there for the land, not so much the buildings. But you know, once again, we would market it as is through the state broker, which would be JLL, and that would go through that process. Just as a note, and I know that this has come up before about appraisal values, the appraisal value is being determined by a licensed appraiser. That appraisal value and the sale or potential sale of that property, we are not legally allowed to accept lower than the appraised value. So whatever that appraised value is, that's our minimum, but that's not our maximum, meaning that comps would still need to be pulled to determine whether or not that appraised value is low, and if we could actually obtain additional funding above and beyond that.
Oh, I'm sure there's valuable land for sure. Okay. Thank you, Albert. Shana.
Thank you. And one piece I did want to mention is just adding a little bit to the new hire that Assistant Superintendent Katchoff mentioned. I think one of the other additional possibilities with the new CTE director is being able to expand on some of the opportunities that we have there on the Tucson campus, obviously for Phoenix as well, but looking at some more growth opportunities and how we utilize and expand on the program that we do have for CTE as well.
Sorry, CTE, that's a continuing educational program or
career technical education.
And what age group is that generally focused on?
I think primarily K through 12, but I will see, did I say that correctly? Or
So this is Oren. Kids can get credit for CTE in high school, but there's things that we can start usually in middle school, 5th grade, as far as career exploration to make sure that we have a good plan and we know what we're doing. But CTE does tend to be more high school based.
Okay.
You can get credit, and then ideally you graduate and you already have credentials where you can jump right into the workforce, be it if that's technology or welding, mechanics, and that's where it's up to Scott to really decide what are the programs that are needed.
Yeah, that's what I thought when it around the continuing piece, kind of as a certification type of program. Okay. I'm done.
thank you, Albert.
Good questions. Any other questions for Shayna or her team? Seeing none, we will move on to 2.01, approval of the consent agenda consistent with board policy to include items 3.01, 5.01, 5.02, 6.01, 6.02, 6.03, 6.04, 6.05, 6.06, 6.07, and 7.02. Do I have any comments or questions, or can I get a motion?
This is board
This
member.
is Linda. President Kneifel, can we move to approve all of those items? Can we do them all at once? Is that okay? Okay, just wanted to make sure. Then this is Linda Bove, and I move that we approve the consent agenda, all of those numbers as read, and go for a vote.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All righty then. All those in favor, if you can come on screen and just give us a hand raise, that would be great. All right, motion approved. Then we are moving down to 4.01, the finance report by the Director of Business Services, Kimberly Bittridge.
Good afternoon, Board President Kneifel, Superintendent Reitman, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, Assistant Superintendent Chekchop, members of the board, and ASDB community. You've been provided with our most recent board report that covers the financial data for May 2022 and May 2023. The data was covered in a more detail at our most recent Finance Committee meeting held last Thursday, July 13th. With Board President Kneifel and Board Member Mike Gordon. Also in attendance were Superintendent Reitman and Assistant Superintendent Cooper. In addition to reviewing the May budget to actual reports, Chris Brown from the Arizona Department of Education discussed institutional vouchers with the committee. The total student count for June 1st, 2023 is 2,173, a decrease of 61 students when compared to the June 1st, 2022 count of 2,234. There was no change in the site-based student count. The cooperative student count increased by 8, while preschool decreased by 33 and birth to 3 programs decreased by 36. As of June 1st, we had about 489 FTE, which included 8.5 FTE at FBC. At that time, we employed 704 staff. Only 104 are full-time with a 1.0 FTE. There are currently 238 vacancies across the agency. Vacant positions are posted until filled. And additionally, many staff start at the beginning of the school year. The highlights of the May 2023 financial report show the revenues of $55.6 million were $6.1 million higher than the May 22 revenue of $49.5 million. The major difference is the increase in general funds of $3.4 million for capital improvements, salary increases, and one-time funding for transportation. The increase in the institutional vouchers of $3 million resulted from the April 22 payment being received in June 2022 versus May. These are offset by a decrease in the classroom site fund of approximately $500,000. The per pupil count for the classroom site fund decreased from 733 in FY22 to 708 in FY23. The projected FY 2024 per pupil amount is $758, an increase of $50. The BFY 2023 obligated expenditures of $59.2 million were $6.4 million higher than the BFY 2022 expenses of $52.8. The increases are in salaries, professional and outside services, including contracted transportation, first to three services, one-to-one nurses, voucher reimbursements, and contracted food services, and other operating expenses, mostly from the ISA with Arizona Department of Transportation for agency fleet maintenance and fuel. There's an increase in the non-appropriated salaries and benefits from approximately 20% to 44%. This resulted from the stipend paid to the teachers and the related services support staff from the classroom site fund. The stipends for the related services support staff were issued for the first time in 2023. The increase in the expenditures from this funds was about $470,000 over last year. If there are no questions on any of the information presented, this concludes my report of the agency's financial status.
Thank you, Kim. Does anyone have any questions for Kim? Right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Just trying to think.
Hi there. I
Me-
just would like to adjust very quickly. We are at the 2-hour mark, and if it's at
Out.
all possible for the interpreters and cart services to have a break.
Yep. Why don't we take a 15-minute break and resume at right about 6:15. Okay, I have 6:15. I just want to check to make sure everyone is back. Great. Awesome. Then we're going to move forward with agenda item 7.01, information and discussion of an introduction and possible discussion of policies IGA, IGD, IJJ, and JLCD. Director of Policy and Government Relations, Maria Murphy.
Good evening, Board President Kneifel, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendents. This is Maria Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations. I apologize for not being able to show my face. I have had a series of connectivity problems and I had to call into the meeting, so my apologies for that. You have before you the red lines of the 4 policies that Board President Kneifel just mentioned. I believe that you were sent, that the board was sent those in advance to have the opportunity to review. They were also posted on the website. I have not received any questions or any comments from the public or any board members, but I would like to make myself available at this time if anybody does have questions regarding these policies.
I'm going to recognize Linda.
Yes, hello. Hi, Maria, and thank you, President Kneifel. I would like to ask you to explain the reason behind the revisions for each of the 4 policies, and who made those revisions, just briefly for each of the 4, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Board Member Bove. These requests were made because of they were suggestions that were suggested by the Arizona School Boards Association, and they are in response to laws that were passed earlier this year during the legislative session to ensure that we're in compliance with the laws. So for IGA and IGD, and I believe also IJJ, they just wanted to reiterate that textbook committees need to comply with open meeting law requirements. And we already comply with open meeting law requirements. However, this was a suggestion that that we make this explicit in our board policies. In regards to policy JLCB, again, this is in response to state laws. And in particular, what was added to state laws was seizure and seizure management plans. And so you will see in there additions regarding how we are going to do seizure management plans. We already, as a matter of practice, work already with auto-injectable epinephrine, with inhalers, I believe with Narcan as well, but the seizure management plans, that is new to Arizona state law, so that had to be, that needs to be added as well. So that is the impetus behind why these policies are being changed.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. I appreciate that.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. This is UK. Thank you, Maria. Are there any other questions for Maria? Maria, is this an actionable item? It says information and discussion on the agenda.
It's specifically, this is the first read, so it's just discussion, and then we would bring this back for a second read in September. I'm not asking for emergency adoption at this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Maria before moving on? Thank you, Maria.
Thank
Moving
you.
on- Moving on to 7.03, discussion and action item, election of new board secretary. I am open to nominations.
I'll nominate Brittany Buchanan.
Brittany, will you accept this nomination?
This is Linda Bovee, second.
I'll accept.
Awesome. Do we have any other nominations for board secretary? Seeing none, all those in favor of Brittany Buchanan taking on the secretary position, say aye. Aye. Yay.
Aye.
All right. All those opposed? Congratulations, Madam Secretary.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 8.01, call to the public for non-agenda items. I do have one for today. And I'm going to apologize before I even start because I'm going to spell the last name because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It is from a current staff, Dan McAlees, McAlees. And the subject is union. And their comments are, I wish to thank the board for allowing me to present some of my thoughts. My name is Dan McAlees, and I am a high school teacher for ASD life skills students. I have been teaching for 30 plus years. During this time, I have seen staff go through some difficult situations with very limited support. This has led to staff retention problems and low work morale. I feel the Arizona State School for the Deaf and Blind Education Association, ASDBEA, would help with retaining staff and improving morale. By knowing that having a dedicated support group for staff, not only on campus, but representing our needs with the legislator is a positive morale builder. Also, ASDBEA and AEA can work with the ASDB as a team when working with our state legislation and the representatives for the agency's concerns and needs as well. I hope the board will recognize ASDBEA and work together for the good of the staff and ASDB agency. Thank you for your time, Dan McAlees. That is the only public comment I have. So moving on to 8.02, information and action item. Work session dates or work study session dates for August and October. What I would like to suggest is that we move to have Leticia send out some potential dates for both of those months for work study sessions for the board, and then we can vote on what works best for us. But I want to make sure that ASDB staff are available on those dates as well. Do I have a motion to have Leticia do that? I have a motion from Mike Gordon. Do I have a second? I have a second from Katie Cienko. All those in favor, raise your hand or give me a thumbs up. Okay, awesome. That's everybody, so no opposed. For those meeting dates, we have a couple of things that have come up that I think would be worth discussion. I think I'd like more information on the AEA in general, as I know that there is a chapter on the Tucson campus, and I have been approached by them and would like for them and maybe AEA to discuss this with us at one of those work study sessions, and maybe include our Attorney General as well for additional questions. There are school districts that have incorporated them. There's only a few that we know of statewide. I would like to be open to the discussion and have the conversation and learn a little bit more. I don't know enough about this to make an informed decision at this point. And also I want to make sure that this does not conflict in any way with ASDB as a state agency. I know in other state agencies, there are certain prohibitions around some of this kind of stuff. So I just want to make sure that anything we move forward with, we are doing our due diligence ahead of time. We've also, based on some of the, what's the word I want? Some of the trainings that have happened, I think it's time to have a discussion again about language acquisition and the direction of ASDB as an overall agency. So those are two ideas that I have. I understand from Albert Duff that we are going to have a presentation, an updated presentation of the master facility plan at our next board meeting. That might come up at a future work study again if we need to look into things more in depth, but I'm also open to any ideas that the board may have. Lynn.
Suki, this isn't an immediate concern because there's so many other hot things that we have going on out there. But I think it would be a good idea if we can bring ASBA in, ASBA, and do some training with our board. We have a number of new members, and so we know what our role is, what our parameters are, but just to be, brought up on what a board, how a board needs to function.
Love that idea, Lynn. Thank you. Connected to a previous one, give me 1 second, Linda. Maria, if before a work study on the ASDBEA and having that conversation, if the board could get some information from you and ASBA about policy H, we do not have that in our current policy. And if we should choose at some point to move forward with this, we would need to amend policy to include that. I would like to know more about that before we make those decisions.
Yes, Board President Kneifel, I have been researching that. ASBA did get back to me, and they do not have model policies under the H volume because it is not required under Arizona state law. So we would basically have to draft our own policies if the board chooses to move in that direction. And I am in the process of collecting sample policies from school districts around the state that do have these policies.
Awesome, thank you. Linda Bove, if you can come back on and let me and add what you would like.
Yes, hello. Sorry about that. I wanted to go back to the comment about what Lynn was saying. You mentioned board responsibilities and how the board functions. I believe that's in policy. I couldn't tell you the number or the letter, I forgot. But I believe, BCD, is it B? BCD, I believe. I believe that we are required to have a training. The board is required to have a training in terms of what our obligations are, responsibilities, how we are to function, plus the understanding that we are responsible to sign the conflict of interest form annually to ensure that we avoid a conflict of interest. And that's supposed to be included, I believe. So is that what we're talking about, Lynn? Lynn, yes. So thank you, Lynn, for bringing that up.
And if there are any other things that you're not thinking of off the top of your head today, please feel free to either email Annette or myself in regards to future work study sessions so that we can get those things on the calendar. Otherwise, hearing nothing else, I will move on to 8.03, discussion and possible action item, agenda items for the next board meeting. Colette.
Yeah, I would like to discuss the accessibility issues in at ASDB.
Thank you, Colette. I'm glad you brought that up and reminded me. Albert, that was something that I wanted to ask in relationship to the master's facilities plan, because I would guess that any renovations would have to be brought up to current ADA standards. So could we make sure that we touch on that in that presentation as well? We received the committee's report on some of the accessibility issues, and I think it would be good to have a conversation of how those will be addressed.
Absolutely, we'll make sure that those items are addressed within the presentation, as well as some examples from other deaf and blind schools that have represented even more accessibility topics. So I think we have a lot that we can learn from our partners around the country.
Great, thank you. Anything else for the next board agenda? Katie.
Yes, this is Katie Sanko. Thank you. Based on, well, sorry about that. My dog just wants to say hi there. Based on what I heard at the last board meeting, there were ASDB staff that made public comments about the low morale. And so I would like to bring that up for discussion and potentially a work study about how we can improve the work culture on both campuses, and also including, I'm sorry for the interpreter, including the co-ops as well.
Thank you, Katie. I'm going to kind of task Anita possibly to talk about, we've seen some of the recruitment efforts, but maybe talk about some of the retention efforts for staff as well as part of Katie's suggestion.
Yes, please.
And what kinds of things we're doing on campuses and within the co-ops to recognize and retain good staff.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And Linda, did you want to add?
Yes, and in addition to that, retaining students, keeping our students from transferring out of our campus programs. I mean, either or both of them. And Katie saying, yes, I agree to that as well. This is Linda. One additional thing, thinking about what does ASDB look like compared to district programs? What do district programs have to offer? What do we have to offer? What do school districts not have that ASDB does? And can we talk about that during a work study session or something to consider?
I agree. Yeah.
So, and it doesn't have to be the next board meeting agenda necessarily, but I think a work study session might be more apropos for that topic.
Something to keep in mind, definitely.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Anything else for the next board agenda? Again, if something comes up, please share it with either myself or Annette or both of us. Seeing no additional comments, moving on to 9.01, action item adjournment. You're on mute.
This is Lynn. I move that we adjourn this meeting.
I'll second it.
We have, awesome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. We're all in favor. I appreciate your flexibility today. I appreciate the staff hustling to get this online for us so that we could go ahead with our meeting. I also appreciate them taking all of the time to answer all of the questions today. It was a really good meeting and I really appreciate you all.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Have a great night.